Welcome everyone to this year's Precision Ag and Production Plot here in Mitchell, South Dakota. With C&B Operations, I'm Jeff Buick.
I'm Nate Jansen.
And right now we're standing out in what we call Plot 4. And if you followed us last year with our plot where we grew corn, we really ended the year taking a look at stalk rolls and the different John Deere corn heads that we have and how it processed through the corn head. And then we followed it up with different types of tillage and even no-till. And so we're standing in front of really what's the final end product of what we've seen out there. And really when we take a look at the plots that we're doing in our dealership, that's really what it's about. It's taking a look at the benefits of the products that we have, the enhancements you can do to them, the upgrades that you can do to them, make sure that they're set right when you go to the field, and really optimizing your equipment for the conditions that are local to your area.
So when we look at all of the products, the other part that we want to look at is the entire production cycle, right? Just like we've got out at our plot here, looking at how one thing affects another, how one pass is affecting another, and then ultimately that end goal that we're talking about, making the proper seed bed, giving that seed the best possible yield potential that we can, and ultimately driving profitability into our bottom pockets.
So we're going to take a look here in a little bit, some of the effects on soil moisture and residue breakdown that the 2680H, the 2660 VT, the 2730 combination ripper, and no-till had on this ground here at our plot in Mitchell. From there, we're going to get ready to plant soybeans in the plot this year. And we got a variety of different pieces of equipment that we're going to be showcasing this year as well, along with some different trials. So what are a few of the things we're going to be working with here this year, Nate?
So we'll be looking at, of course, soybean trials, just like we did corn trials last year, a regular kind of seed plot, if you will. Outside of that, it's going to be looking at a narrow row, so 15-inch soybean plot. We'll be running a 1795 planter for that. Next to doing side-by-sides with our DB60, configured up into the 30-inch spacing there.
Yep, we'll also be taking a look at population rates. We'll also be taking a look at seeding depth as well. A lot of conversation in the marketplace today at, what seeding rates can I have? A lot of that is coupled with what technology is on your planter, right? Yep. So we're going to be taking a look at that at seeding time. And then we're going to come back this summer and take a look at different application rates. If we're going to be applying Liberty, for example, we're going to do different rates there. We're also looking at fungicide application trials there as well. So that's in Plot 2 is where we're going to be doing a lot of our trials and research. Now strip till on soybeans, you hear of a lot of guys doing that, Nate, or not?
Not a lot, but the one thing that has become a little more prevalent in the marketplace is just fertilizer in general on soybeans, whether it's a pop-up starter fertilizer or, again, doing the strip till with a P&K type application. So there's more people out there, more so asking the questions, is this economically viable? And we're here to really put that to the test and see what we see.
Yeah, especially when markets are good, it makes you think about, what can I do to get the most out of every acre because it starts opening doors for things like that. So we do have a 2510S with a 1910 air cart behind it that we're going to do in our strip till portion, as well as some different fertilizer applications, both in furrow. You take a look at Exactorate on that DB60 that we have out there. Really industry exclusive technology that allows us to very accurately control the types of products that we're putting down on the right acre in the right place. And so we'll have that on that DB60 in that plot as well.
Yep, absolutely. And like you mentioned just a second ago, Jeff, too, looking at our populations, what really has come to happen, especially with the ExactEmerge planter, is being able to singulate the soybeans and push the populations of our soybeans down to lower areas because we're singulating, we're not just dropping 3 in a spot, that we're actually able to potentially gain more yield with fewer seeds. And what we really want to do is push that threshold to get a better understanding, field by field, region by region, where that sweet spot may be, again, depending on the year.
Right. And where we're standing right now in Plot 4, we're going to be planting some very, very early soybeans. And so with the CodaFest this year, we're going to be inviting everybody who's at the CodaFest to come out here to the C&B plot. We're actually going to be combining this field early due to just the early nature of the soybeans that we're going to be putting in. Extremely early for this climate, but it'll coincide very well with what's going on at the CodaFest. So we'll have the opportunity to come out here, take a look at John Deere's latest technology with harvest equipment when we're ready to harvest those soybeans later on in the year. So that's just a real broad recap of what we're doing here at the plot. Both last year, what we're standing in today, what we're going to take a look at first, and part of that whole production cycle. And then as we change crops and plant soybeans this year and take a look at all of the things when you got soybeans in your operation that you might be taking a look at to add to your bottom line. And really that's the whole point of these plots, is to help our people learn, our employees, our customers, our partners in the business. We're all committed to our customers and helping improve their bottom line. So that's our Precision Ag and Production plot in a nutshell. Let's go ahead and take a little closer look here in plot 4 at the results from tillage from last fall.
Yeah.
All right, so we're in our first area of plot 4 where we ran the 2680H across a variety of different stock rolls here in the plot. And so we just want to take a little closer look at what we're looking at for residue breakdown and soil moisture, because obviously the type of tool that you use is going to have a big effect on that. The other thing we take a look at with residue is just how fast the ground warms up. And why would we care how warm the ground is, Nate?
Well, here in the upper Midwest, obviously soil moisture and soil temperature is going to determine when it's go time to go plant. Right, we're in a cornfield. Optimal soil temperature is going to be 50 degrees to put our seeds in the ground. So basically the more bare soil we have exposed, typically the old make the soil black, right? We absorb more of the sunlight and warm up a little bit faster. But the organic matter also plays a really important part of that whole kind of ecosystem as well.
That's right. And so here's where we ran the 2680H out. We also have where knife rolls on our corn head, we had the Stockmaster on. So you can see that our trash is really worked up here. As you look down the field, you can see a difference in the stock rolls here again, but a lot of decomposition over the winter time. So even just kneeling here, you can feel with your knee that the ground's pretty warm. So right at the surface, we're doing good. So another thing we're just going to take a look at quick, if we just dig down about 2 inches where we're going to put that corn seed at, that's what we're just going to take a look at and just see what our soil moisture looks like. So as we look in here, it's real easy to dig up, not super compacted, and we got a pretty decent soil moisture profile here. Not a ton, I would say, but it's aired up pretty well, right? Nate, as you take a look at that, what stands out to you as you take a look at that?
Like a lot of places this spring, we see some moisture, inch and a half down, but definitely less than we ideally want to see in I'd say a typical spring. So part of what's going to play into this when we get the planter out here is looking at our downforce and really making sure that we get that set right, so we're really keeping the unit in the ground, getting to our planting depth. So we're probably going to be looking at a little more downforce margin than what we'd see in an average year, just because of it being a little bit drier. But there's good moisture content, and temperature also has been really pretty good so far here.
The other thing you see is this stalk buried down in here, right? It's opened up, right? We talked about blossoming of the stalk during the fall. That's cut open, so we get a lot of microbial activity in there to start decomposing the stalks. You can see that they're down there in the dirt. So as we just didn't leave it all laying on top, we're building up organic matter, so that helps hold some soil moisture as well. Gives some holding capacity for nutrients as well in the soil profile. And so, for many of our customers, that organic matter is highly important to them. So 2680H here on the Stockmaster portion of the corn head did an extremely nice job. As we take a look behind us here, let's take a step back. Here's just an example, next row over, of where we had the Stockmaster off. So a little bit different here in what we're dealing with for residue, right, Nate?
Yep, a little more residue. Naturally, they're going to be a little bit longer pieces of residue as well. So we can see actually on some of the pieces here, you can see where they were crimped as they went through the stalk rolls. Still busted it apart, but also not seeing quite the breakdown. Some of it also being here in central South Dakota, that some of the residue on the other part of the stalk rolls could have blown away, right? So we also want to make sure that we're doing a good job pinning it to the soil, which when we look at some of our other tillage pieces, also just how is the mixing combining and also kind of trapping that residue to the ground look. So that's all part of the equation.
Yep, and just as a reminder, when we started with tillage here, we had 300 pounds per square inch on the penetrometer, so the ground was tight, and it was real hard for the tools in some areas to really penetrate the ground like we see in many of the areas. So That's also a thing that we want to call everybody's attention here too. But again, every fall is different, every spring is different, so we really want to go over what you see with variations in ground conditions. But over here, don't expect to see a whole lot different in terms of soil moisture. But in the profile here, as we look through the trench, you actually do see a little bit more. And I think that's a product of just not having as much cover, right? So it's drying out a little bit more. You can see the moisture and the color of the soil here is actually a little bit more than what we've seen with the Stockmaster head.
It certainly is. We're pinning some of the moisture inside of the residue, and it's going to slowly kind of help infiltrate into the soil there as well and help keep that there. Now the other side of that is our soil temperature. If we were to look at that, it could be a little cooler as well. It's going to be probably hard to tell just to the touch, but all things we want to consider when we look at our different tillage practices, along with the residue management, like we talked in our fall video series as well. A lot of considerations there in terms of how we're moving the residue through, and then also integrating it into the soil and pinning it down to the ground.
So here when we talk about compaction, we took a penetrometer out and we tested each one of the tools, and we went down at a 3-inch, 6-inch, and 9-inch level. And if you remember this fall, we were sitting at 300 pounds per square inch. And so at the 3-inch level, we're actually loosened the ground up. We're at 150 pounds per square inch. Now down at the 6 and 9-inch level, we're still at 300 pounds, right? So when you take a look at the 2680H, it's really what it's designed to do, is to break up that top size and mix in the residue, which you've seen here in the samples that we dug in the soil. So really the tool did a nice job of getting the ground ready at where that seed bed's going to be created. And then we're going to hit it again with the tool here this spring and see the kind of seed bed that we have as a result of that. So as we take a look at the 2680H area here with the Stockmaster turned on, our soil temp is at 58 degrees. So we have more incorporation of residue here since the Stockmaster is turned on, exposing more soil to sunlight, which is going to warm up our soil profile where we're going to be seeding our soybeans into. So sitting right at 58 degrees now, a really good temperature to start seeding. 2680H here, we've got Stockmaster turned off, so we got a little bit more residue. Again, a lot of soil showing up here. The 2680H does a nice job of incorporating residue. So I tried to be hard on it. Just found a pile of some stalks here, and still we're sitting at 58 degrees. So soil profile's done a nice job warming up. Just like to see it leveled off a little bit more before we come in and start seeding with it, which is what we're going to do here in 2021 for our trial of plot 4.
With that, we'll look at our next tillage plot and look at our 2660 VT.
All right, so we're going to take a look here at the 2660 VT area. We just took a look at the 2680H. And so a few things when we walked in here right away, Nate, that we noticed was something different on the ground, right?
Look on the ground here. We can see right where the 2660 VT blades were. So part of that was the fact of how hard and dense the soil was this last fall. And we're also towards the headlands too, so turning around, getting up to speed, some of those things played a factor in that as well. We didn't have any headlands on this demo plot either, so those are some of the considerations we see out there, but very noticeable where our blade spacing was on that 2660 vertical tillage tool.
That's why we say speed, right? Gang angle, there's flexibility, but if we don't have it tight enough, we can even see here, the other thing I noticed, Nate, is the pre-emerge weeds that we have coming here too. So a little bit more here than what we've seen over with the 2680H, but something to also note, right? When you're using that tool, speed, gang angle, all the things that make that important. So there's a different story to be told here with compaction in comparison to the 2680H. In the top 3 inches with the penetrometer here, we're at 75 PSI. We went down to 6 inches, we were at 150, and then down at 9 inches, 300. Like again, what we've seen across the whole thing with 300 PSI when we tried to engage the ground. So the tool really did a nice job of loosening up the seed bed at multiple levels. I think we got a little more penetration with the 2660 VT, but again, gang angle and speed played a part in what we're seeing here, especially closer to the headlands with this tool.
The straight commander blades on the VT tool as well. We're going to allow a little more of that penetration versus more concave dish-like traditional disc blade. The straight commander blades on the VT tool as well. We're going to allow a little more of that penetration versus more concave dish-like traditional disc blade that we see in the 2680 as well. That we see in the 2680H as well. Again, all things to consider.
As we start digging down in here, definitely a lot more moisture right up on top is for what I can see here.
Definitely.
Compared to the other one. You definitely can tell though it's a little bit tighter compared to the 2680H. When you start digging down into there, if I go down in here where the blade is, really nice and smooth. But again, that speed and that gang angle, when I'm going in between here, I can really tell the difference in that. So, you know, where we got good gang angle and speed, we've got the soil loosened up real nice too, but you can tell just by digging back. But the profile of soil moisture here looks pretty decent, right?
Yep.
And again, we're in Stockmaster on, so we're doing a nice job of chopping up the stock, sizing the residue, getting that ground black. But soil moisture here still looks pretty good for the amount of compaction, the less amount of compaction that we're dealing with in this situation.
I think one thing we need to note too, Jeff, when we talk about the 2660 VT is the Pro Finish system on that tool. We've got a dual rolling basket. We've got a reverse knife edge, so we're kind of pinning that residue down to the ground and then finishing it off with the basket behind. So we're kind of doing a dual action, really leaves a nice level finish. But the big thing here I think we look at, there's more residue in this part with the Stockmaster on than there was with the Stockmaster on with the 2680H. I think we did a little bit better job pinning the residue to the ground with the 2660 than what we did at the 2680 in comparable conditions.
Yep, and even as you take a look into the soil, when you start digging down into it, the pieces that are down in the soil tend to be a little bit smaller. This one just fell into the trench, but it also does a nice job of sizing the residue up again. You're probably a little bit more than what we've seen out of the 2680H, but again, gang angle and speed come into play there, but definitely that Pro Finish system does a nice job of pinning that residue down. And again, as you look down the field here, probably a little bit more residue laying on top, but again, did it blow away in the other one? You know, and this one held it down a little bit better.
All right, so we've looked at the Stockmaster on with the 2660. Let's take a step back and now look at what it looked like with the Stockmaster turned off. So we get down here, we can obviously see longer pieces of residue, just like we did on the 2680H. But ultimately, we're gonna see really similar conditions, just talking surface residue, with the Stockmaster on and off, which is part of that pinning it down to the top part of the soil with that Pro Finish system we talked about. A little bit more here, again, just because we've got longer pieces that we're also needing to process. Now, one thing I have not seen so far here, and we maybe need to take a little further walk down, not seeing as much of the blade kind of on the surface that we did on the other part, partially because there's probably a little less or a little more residue here on top.
Right, a little more to process.
Exactly, but we definitely have a combination of large and small pieces of residue. Some of it has been kind of pushed into the soil when it was loose this fall when we worked it. And I would say similar residue, I would say similar moisture content, what we saw with the Stockmaster off. A little more consistent here versus what the 2680 had between the two different Stockmaster on, Stockmaster off.
Correct. Yep, I agree there 100%. It's, you know, you take a look at, if your goal is to protect soil moisture, you want a little bit more of a bed down there when the sun starts beating down on it to protect it, and then just make sure you have the right row tillage on that planter to clean a good seed bed, because the last thing we want to do is to pin a lot of this residue down into the seed trench, because that's going to affect germination, it's going to affect the vitality of the plant long term as it's trying to emerge from the soil.
And when we come through with our spring tillage, if we do spring tillage, if we were coming no-till in this, obviously you've got a little higher chance of hair pinning. Having the opener basically pinch the residue into the seed trench, drop a seed on top of that, and of course that's going to cause poor seed to soil contact.
So it'd take that, it'd be like coming in here, it pins it down like that and drops a seed right on top of that corn stalk leaf, right?
Exactly.
And so then, yeah, it may sprout, but then it has nothing to grow on after.
And uneven emergence and all those things start to play a factor there. But that's just a consideration for whatever you do on the spring side. If you do any passes or not, just making sure we get to depth and again do that full incorporation and loosening up the soil to create that proper seed bed.
So we take a look at hairpinning in the soil, Nate. What are some things that our customers like to look at or maybe real popular to prevent that from happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at our planters. Obviously what we put right in front of the openers is a huge factor as we prepare that seed bed. So we look at row tillage or row cleaners, sweepers some people call them, but really what's creating a nice runway for our gauge wheels is also a huge factor. Now the DB60 we're going to be planting this plot with has the easy adjust pneumatic row cleaners that Deere has, shark tooth style blades, but we're able to adjust the up and the down force from inside the cab. So if we want to sit and let them kind of float on top like we might do in corn ground, we can do that. In this case, we could sit and have them plow a little bit more in our kind of stockier, more integrated type of ground, or we can kind of pinch them in between and hold them at one specific level.
And the beauty of those is it's all from the cab, right?
Exactly.
Whether you have an 8-row planter or a 32-row planter or whatever it happens to be, anytime you have to go out and adjust the pins or screw adjust, it just takes time, and time is money, and time is productivity, and so being able to fine adjust those from the cabs is really important. Now, is the whole planter on one gang there, or can you adjust the heights of your row cleaners kind of independently within gangs versus the whole planter as one?
Yep, so a little bit of both. We have two sections we can control. By default from the factory, we basically control the center section, so right behind the tractor, right in front of your main load wheels on the planter, and then the wings are on a section together as well. So again, allows for different presets and different adjustments between them, but ultimately being able to control it versus having to get out and make adjustments that we typically tend not to make, especially when we're staring at the finish line and trying to get there as fast as we can.
And if this is your seed trench right down here, your gauge wheel's sitting right next to it, and anytime we don't clear off some of these root balls, right? This here again is not done any spring tillage to, but if we just planted right into this, our gauge wheels have to bounce over this root clod, right? So we need to make sure that we brush this out of the way so we got a nice even tabletop soil profile to put our gauge wheel to, so we maintain consistent depth down here in the seed trench.
Absolutely.
All right, so as we take a look at temperature in the 2660 VT area here, again with the Stockmaster on, we're doing a nice job of really chopping up that residue and spreading it out. The VT's doing a nice job of chopping it up and incorporating in it. We're sitting right about 58 degrees now with our soil temperature, so just a real nice consistent seed bed that we're ready to plant into if needed. But again, we're going to run the 2660 over it here again and just again work up the stalks, the residue, and get it ready for planting soybeans. So now that we move back to the 2660 VT where the Stockmaster is turned off, we got a little bit more of a bed of residue here to deal with. Now I chose the location for the temperature probe that, you know, just isn't in bare soil. We've got some residue here to work with, so maybe being a little bit harder on the tool, but we're seeing 58 degrees with the seed bed temperature here.
So looking at kind of the incorporation of the residue and the moisture that we have in our soil profile, let's now take a look at our 2730 combination ripper and see how that compares.
All right, so here we're in the 2730 combination ripper area. Again, we're Stockmasters on. As you take a look down the field, it's almost hard to tell where the different stock rolls were changed on the corn heads, because the 2730 combination ripper just does such a nice job of taking that residue, turning it over, ripping up the hard pan, covering that fracture point back shut, and then using that rolling basket to really level things back off and pin the residue to the ground. And so if you're dealing with a lot of residue, if you're dealing with narrow rows, the combination ripper does a really good job, you know, especially if you're dealing with heavy soils, compaction zones, those sorts of things. It's a great tool from John Deere, especially when you couple it with True Set. You can control all of those set points from the cabs and pressures and everything else. I could just go on and on about True Set as well, and we'll get into that a little bit later. As we take a look down here at the soil profile, obviously a lot more soil exposed here, right? We buried a lot more residue, and you can see just how it's sized up even just to begin with, but now we've taken a look and buried it down into the soil. So as we take a look, you can see some of the residue that's already in there. If we start to dig down in here, that's the first thing you notice, Nate.
Much softer. Right, you can tell even as we walk through the field that I can take my boot and really push into the soil. There's not as much of a hard hand, so to speak, kind of on the top layer.
Right. Yep. You definitely feel like you're walking on a cushion more.
Yep.
The other thing I noticed is that there doesn't seem to be as much moisture in the soil profile because it's, we're able to dry it out a little bit more for as black as it is.
Yep.
So it also is going to affect germination. It's going to affect temperature. We have our temperature probe in here again. Currently, we're reading here right at about 58 right now for our soil temp. So pretty warm. It's something that we could plant into and have good emergence right away. So again, that's what we see here. The other thing we don't feel is like where maybe the blades ran, right? Or, you can, like you did with your hand, you can pull it just about straight on across and not feel all the ridges or anything like that. So again, it just does a nice job of boiling up the soil profile and mixing in the residue.
Absolutely. One thing that's important to note, throughout all of our different trials, we had a very mild winter here in southern South Dakota. Pretty little, quite little snowfall, and very little rainfall really so far this spring. Been pretty dry overall, so the ground hasn't been packed by a lot of snow. It also hasn't been packed by hard rains. I would say it's really left pretty much how it was back in the fall.
So we talk about compaction as well. We've done the penetrometer tests and all of the tests here. Again, here at the 2730, just like the 2660 VT, 75 PSI at 3 inches, 150 PSI at 6, and 300 at 9. And so when you take a look at the difference in compaction, not a whole heck of a lot. Like we were talking, the blades of that VT have a tendency to penetrate more into that soil because of the vertical nature of the blade. But again, both tools did a nice job of working up the seedbed, reducing that 300 PSI ground that we were working with this fall. That was real tight for fall conditions. So let's take a look, take a step back at where we had the Stockmaster turned off and see if we notice any differences. All right, so we're in the 2730 area where we had the Stockmaster turned off, right, Nate? So what's the first thing we're noticing as we take a look at the field and what's in front of us here?
Yeah, obviously we've got a little longer residue, just like we've seen with any of the other Stockmaster off kind of areas. But at the same time, not near as much, right? Because of the nature of the 2730. We're going to take a lot more of that residue in the soil. We're going to turn a lot more and bury a lot more residue than we have in the other areas. So even you see the spots that have kind of been ripped up by either the stalk rolls in this case, or the blades on the 2730, you also notice that they've been pinned to the soil a little bit more because dirt's been thrown or soil's been thrown on top of them versus just pinning them down with a rolling basket in these cases. But overall, it's been broke up. It's really dry. The dry down's really been accelerated as well because it's still kind of surface based. The sun is still going to beat down, penetrate, and it's been opened up.
Right. Yep. So as we take a look at the soil profile again, you don't see a whole lot of difference between them. Again, real nice and loose. Again, you see that residue here pinned into the soil, so it helps build up organic matter. It helps break down the residue as well. We're able to get that worked into the soil. Again, you feel that it's the warmth of the soil as you dig into it. Currently, we're sitting right at the same temperature, right at that 58, 59 degrees. But it's just a real nice composition in the soil here. So probably a little bit more soil moisture in here, but not a whole heck of a lot of difference because we don't have a ton of cover here, right, Nate?
Yep, about the same, I would say.
Yeah, so pretty consistent. This tillage tool doesn't much care what kind of stock roll that you're using. Its primary purpose is to bury, incorporate, and reduce hard pan, and that's what we're seeing here.
Yep, and it did a good job at that, there's no question.
Yep. Now, we're going from primary heavy tillage, right?
Yep.
With the 2730 combination ripper. In this test, we also understand that there's some of you that don't do any tillage at all. And so we have a no-till section that we're going to take a look at next.
C&B Operations has deep roots in agriculture. Within all of our locations, our values remain the same, and we share those values with the farmers we serve. Growth the right way means that no matter where C&B goes, the individual farmer is at the heart of our operations. C&B Operations is proud to be your hometown John Deere dealer. Thank you for over 30 years of business and many more to come.
So now we're in our no-till part of plot number 4, and so as you can see, we're in the Stockmaster on portion. As you take a look at the stalks down here, just really sawed off at the top. They are blossomed open a little bit, so you can see the black color in nature, right, and how easy they're still just breaking apart, dried out, and so basically breaking all the way down. And so as we take a look at the residue on the ground, obviously since we're not doing any tillage, we're playing with the residue that we have left. And so when you deal with Stockmaster, it's going to throw that trash really across the whole header. And so you get a little bit more of an even distribution, I would say, across the header in a no-till situation, where when we have the Stockmaster turned off, you see that trash kind of lying right more in with the row, right? Mm-hmm. So as we take a look at that, that's kind of how it all lines up when we get into the Stockmaster off. But here with Stockmaster on, it's laid out nice and crossed as we take a look at first just residue. Then as we take a look at really digging into the soil, as we start getting in here, right about 2 inches where we drop seed in the ground, definitely a lot more moisture in the soil profile. You can also tell that when we were digging, it wasn't just like Nate could grab his hand and pull it across just too easy like we could with some of the other tillage pieces of equipment. So a little bit more compaction here as well. When we took the penetrometer across the soil, we were at 3 inches, we were 200 PSI, 6 inches, 250, and 300 PSI at 9 inches. And again, we started with about 300 PSI at fall tillage. So we still got, you know, that ground kind of loosening up throughout the winter months, and Mother Nature did her work. But we also still have, you know, some compaction here that is still residual from prior year.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so as we take a look at soil moisture though, we are still holding it in there. So when we're doing that strip till, when we're doing that no-till type practice, it does help conserve moisture. As we take a look at our soil temperature here, where we were 58 to 60 and the other ones were right about 50 to 52 degrees soil temperature. So obviously ground, and I can feel it in my knees too, the ground isn't heating up as well as we've seen with some of the other portions of our tillage trial.
Yep, we're insulated a lot more, of course. We even had some surface moisture up on top here underneath some of our residue, as we can see right there. So very clearly more moisture, which we would come to expect. But again, also have to consider the warming of the soil too. So whether that's a total no-till with a coulter out front type of situation or strip tilling, you know, obviously we would want to get it going in the soil now or before we plant to help kind of loosen, warm up, and turn that soil over to make that nice seed bed.
Absolutely. So let's take a look now at the Stockmaster turned off and some of the differences in a no-till situation. All right, so now we're in our no-till area and we're taking a look at Stockmaster off. You can see really the blossoming of the top of the stalks here, as Nate has in front of him. You just hear how dry and brittle they are. Again, that the way that the John Deere corn head is processing these stalks really helps them break down, especially in a no-till situation. And again, as I said before, when you take a look at how the stalks are processed here, the residue falls a little bit more right in with the row versus having more of a solid mat across. As we take a look, you still have some moisture underneath some of the residue here, as we've seen in some of the other areas. So we still have that taken care of. But still, Mother Nature did some work on compaction, but still just a little bit more tough getting into the soil. It's going to take a little more downforce to get the row units in there, but that's not a concern when you take a look at active pneumatic or individual hydraulic downforce on these John Deere planters that we're going to see out here today. Really suited for no-till conditions as well, right, Nate?
Yep, absolutely. And we're condition-wise, we're really pretty similar here as we were in the Stockmaster on area. Obviously not didn't do any ground engaging type of tillage implements after we combined, so really expect to see similar results, maybe a little more matting here overall as we look kind of down the rows.
Yep, the other thing that I will say is we put our soil temperature probe right in the center of the row, and so most people when they come in no-till are going to be, you know, laying their seed down in between the two existing rows that are out there, and we're sitting right about 58 degrees. for our temperature. So very similar to where, you know, we had tillage, maybe just a little bit less, but the soil condition here, right in the middle of the row, has more exposure to the sun in this type of situation. So it's going to warm up that seed bed just a little bit more. So Nate, as we take a look at the different tillage trials we did in 2020, and as we look at them here in 2021, what are some things that really stood out to you?
Yeah, looking at the 2660 VT in both the Stockmaster on and off situations was very interesting. Specifically when we looked at the penetrometer and how loose the soil actually was for a kind of straight up and down blade. It's a little contrary to what we might think kind of historically with tillage pieces,
right?
That we actually had a lot of breakdown and a lot of breakup of the soil, and it looks like it's going to make a really nice seed bed to plant into.
And some VTs on the market today, it really fluffs things up, and then the wind can take all of your residue away. I like how the VT also, you know, kind of matted it back down and pinned that residue to the soil, so it helps build up organic matter. But we didn't compromise soil temperature in that scenario. The other thing I like is how smooth it lays. The 2730 does a nice job boiling up the hard pan and incorporating residue, there's no doubt, depending upon what stock roll you have. However, if you wanted to plant behind that 2660 in the springtime, it's smooth enough where I think a guy could get away with doing it versus a combination ripper where, you know, it's nice to level off just some of those dirt clods that remain from prior years. So it was definitely that really, I think as we take a look at the conditions that we have out here and how heavy soil compaction we had that we were dealing with this fall, and really between 2660 and 2730 did a nice job really breaking up that hard pan and getting things ready for this spring.
Absolutely. And not to shortchange the 2680H, we've seen a lot of conditions out there this spring where it maybe didn't look the best when we first went into it. After pass of the field cultivator or 2680 again or the 2660, really created a much better seed bed than what it looked like on first impression. So really the proof's going to be in the pudding. We've got a lot of things to look at yet. We're really just setting the table for this upcoming year. So really excited to see what each of the different tools are going to bring to the table, especially when we look at Plant 21.
Yep, so as we get ready for Plant 21 and putting soybeans in here to the plot at Mitchell, we are going to be running those tools across our tillage plot here again, so you can see what that looks like on top of, you know, 2680H on top of 2680H and the job it does at preparing the seed bed.
Thanks for joining us and learning about all the exciting technology that John Deere and C&B have to offer between the hard iron and the technology that's available.
Becoming a dealer of choice is not an easy task, but we're definitely committed to it. Both from training our employees, working with our customers, and doing agronomic and production plots like we're standing in here today. We look forward to sharing this information with you and helping you grow your operation into the future.
With C&B Operations, I'm Nate Jansen.
And I'm Jeff Buick, committed to being your dealer of choice.